Hey guys, welcome back. This is the story about what if Naruto was a hollow. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel and like the video as well, it really means a lot. So let's start the what if. Neutra. I do not care if you are the Octava Espada. You are not a warrior. You are a beast who loves nothing more than killing. Someone like that will never be able to defeat me, Neliel said calmly, as she was accosted by Neutra in the hallways of Las Noches. Shut up, Neliel. All this arrogant talk, this impudent talk, when you are simple fraction garbage. And yet she still tried to talk this way to your superior. Where do you get off doing this? A woman like you in the Arrancar army is a good enough excuse for me to target you. A true fool. Neliel muttered, much to the ire of Neutra. He growled like a wild animal, and held his scythe-like Zanpakuto out in front of him in a clear sign of an attack. That's it, I've had enough of your crap. I'm just gonna kill you right now, so just try and see how you fare against me and see if I'm able to defeat you, Neutra shouted, brandishing his scythe. Neliel nodded in understanding, having seen this coming for a while now. Ever since she had become the fraction of the Primera Espada, she had been targeted by the Octava almost constantly. 2 years had passed since the day she first met him, and he had never stopped hating her. And it looked like now was the time when he had finally snapped, and was fully ready to kill her. She drew her Zanpakuto and held it in front of her, unknowingly telegraphing her attacks as she thought of how she was going to defeat Neutra. Neutra, being the far more experienced fighter, picked up on that easily. She was consistently looking at his unguarded left side, and her Zanpakuto was raised to go for an attack to that angle. She was all too easy to read. With great strength, he swung his Zanpakuto at the girl, and the two blades clanged against each other again and again, Neliel's katana hardly holding up against Neutra's scythe. Sparks flew as Neliel went in for a slash that would have taken off Neutra's head, but it was blocked by the concave part of Neutra's crescent scythe. Neutra switched his grip on his Zanpakuto, sliding it down the blade of Neliel's own in an attempt to lift it out of her hand. The female Arrancar smartly pulled out after that moment, taking time to readjust her grip to avoid having her sword get pulled from her hands. She dodged to the left as Neutra tried an upward strike. He hopped into the air with surprising agility after that, angling his scythe downward, trying to use gravity to obliterate his opponent. He got his blade stuck in the ground, but with his kind of strength he had dislodged it within a second, giving Neliel no time to counterattack. Neliel still rushed in, ignorantly thinking that she had still created an opening. "You're open," she shouted, as she too jumped in the air with greater agility, swinging her Zanpakuto at a much wider angle. Neutra smirked, before he threw his arms open as if he was going to embrace that attack. Neliel winced and hesitated at the unorthodox move, something that would cost her, though she still went in for the attack anyway. It was less powerful than it would have been, because now her strike was plagued by hesitation and doubt. She slashed her Zanpakuto down his torso, shocked as she saw sparks begin flying from where the blade made contact. When she was done, Neutra hadn't even flinched, and instead of his body being in tatters, her blade had been dented instead. She grunted, and tried to get away from Neutra's range, but she was far too slow. Her lackluster attack had made her open instead, after what was now an obvious feint attack by Neutra. She hung in the air with bated breath, until Neutra thrust his weapon forward and caught her in the shoulder, sending the new recruit flying back. Neutra retracted the weapon, hissing with satisfaction at his success. Neliel screamed in pain as she clutched her deeply wounded shoulder, her Zanpakuto clattered to the ground uselessly as she squirmed in the sand. It would be a total loss in her favor if she couldn't figure out how to fight with that injury. She wouldn't have time to think, because Neutra was already speeding towards her as fast he could, his scythe outstretching for the killing. With her adrenaline kicking into overdrive, she grabbed her Zanpakuto and blocked the downward swing. Her katana broke in half after that, but she at least avoided the fatal blow. While Neutra was recovering from the recoil, Neliel used Sonido to disappear and try to make her escape from the rabid Arrancar. She popped onto a roof and fell to her knees, the wound acting up again. "Oi, you! Get your bitch ass back here, Neliel!" Neutra shouted in his raspy voice, after spotting Neliel on the rooftop. He ran over to her position, but Neliel sped away. Fortunately for her, Neutra wasn't really that fast, and she could easily outmaneuver him even in her injured state. "Where the hell are you?" he asked, as Neliel hid in the rafters of a dome outside Neutra's personal chambers. She watched him down there rapidly searching for her, before he placed a hand on the ground. Neliel gasped. "Pesquisa," she thought, as she clutched the marble she was holding on to. Her position wouldn't last as a valid hiding spot. She would have to get into the main portion of Las Noches, where fighting wasn't tolerated. As quietly as she could, she jumped down from the rafters, wincing from her injured shoulder. There was an open door across the desert plain that led to the main foyer of Las Noches, and she could probably outspeed Neutra to get there. With her speed, she reached it 5 minutes later, effectively cutting off her pursuer from reaching her. He wouldn't dare attack her now, but the fact remained that she was in danger around Neutra. Whenever she stepped out into the open, she would have to watch her back for any potential attack from him. "I need to go to Naruto and demand more training. At this rate I'm going to get killed by him if I don't make it into the Espada and outrank Neutra." She wandered the halls of Las Noches interior in a slump, wondering if she should seek out some treatment for the injury that she received from Neutra. The medical wing was far away though. She was in the chamber where Aizen and the Espada held their meetings. Naruto's, and by extension her personal chambers, were directly next to this building. She gasped as the double doors to the Espada meeting hall had opened. Apparently there had been some kind of conference between Aizen and an individual Espada rather than the whole group. As luck would have it, the Espada Aizen seemed to be having a conference with was her commanding Espada, though whether that was lucky or unlucky was in the eye of the beholder. She winced as both of her superiors laid eyes upon her, annoyed confusion on Naruto's face as well as amused confusion on Aizen's. Naruto briskly walked up to her, before he backhanded her casually. "Why?" he hissed, as he glared down at the fallen Arrancar with nothing but hatred. Neliel gasped for breath as she clutched her scuffed cheek. That blow had penetrated her hierro. "Is my fraction so weak that she'd show up to me injured? Who's the opponent you crawled away from shamefully this time?" he asked, his abusive nature overriding anything else. Aizen watched the hideous display between Espada and Fraction with a mirthful smile, not even once thinking about whether or not he should help Neliel. Rather, he was focusing on his strongest Arrancar himself. He supposed that Naruto had changed quite a bit since the fall of his kingdom and his subsequent induction into the Espada. The rumors he had heard of Naruto were of a very violent and brutal, yet usually jovial fellow. Naruto loved to smile, even when he was disemboweling his unsuspecting victims. Nowadays, he had a far surlier disposition, rarely ever smiling unless it was an opponent who could grab his attention. Aizen supposed the loss of his kingdom was to blame for the personality change. It was Neutra. She whispered to herself, so that Naruto could just barely hear it. Naruto's mood seemed to take a 180 after that, and he began chuckling. "I see. I expected as much. It's a good thing he's making your life as miserable as possible, now isn't it?" he sneered at his fraction, before he reached out his hand. "Get up." He grabbed her long green hair, getting a firm grip on her tresses, before he tugged her mercilessly to her feet. It almost looked out of place, as Neliel was quite a bit taller than Naruto. She cried out in pain as Naruto dragged her along the hall, not mindful of her injuries in the least. No matter how hard she seemed to struggle, his grip never loosened. The young Arrancar continued to protest all the way back to Naruto's personal quarters, where Naruto finally let go of her hair at the door to hers. She fell to her knees, clutching her scalp where Naruto had almost ripped out her hair by its roots. "Now, Neliel, do you understand why you lost to Neutra?" he asked firmly. Neliel glared at him through her green hair, digging her fingernails into the marble ground. "Because you're not giving me enough training," she blurted out, before she instantly regretted that sentence. Naruto glared at her ferociously, before he released his spiritual pressure, effectively cutting off Neliel's breathing. He swung his right foot back in a wide arc, before he clipped Neliel in the cheek in a sharp kick, propelling the neat Eren car into the wall behind her, creating a small crater. He turned his back to her, still glaring at the crater he made in the wall. "Okay, Neliel, I'll tell you why you lost to him. It's not because my training is lacking or anything, it's simply because you are weak. If I had any other Eren car underneath my command, they would be thriving, and at the very least be an Espada by now. Yet you still can't even keep up with the Octava. Pathetic." He sneered. Neliel gurgled blood, and the red liquid spilled over onto her Eren car uniform. She looked up to Naruto, her expression unreadable. Naruto stared back. "If you're so eager to get harsher training though, I'd be more than happy to oblige," he said evilly, as Neliel could only wonder what she had just gotten herself into. That grin on his face never, ever meant anything good. 3 days later, after her wounds had almost completely healed, she and Naruto were facing opposite each other on the sands directly outside the palace. Naruto's jaw was set and stony, as rigid as one of the quartz trees that littered the Huecomundo desert. Neliel tried to look emotionless, but on the inside she was nervous. She had no idea what Naruto had in store for her. They stared each other for a little while longer, and after one sonido, Naruto had flashed out of existence. Neliel drew her sword, and as soon as she did, Naruto appeared and kicked it out of her hands. The Zanpakuto twirled in the air and became stuck in the sand a distance away from the battlefield, but Naruto had already grasped Neliel by the throat, choking her tightly. "This isn't training, this is a fight," she thought to herself, as the training was far more brutal than even Naruto's worst training methods. Now, he was actively trying to kill her. He used his free hand to charge up a Zero, which at this point blank range would obliterated her head and leave nothing of it left. She cried out as she placed her hands over his, and began kicking in order to try and loosen herself. She managed to free herself eventually, but not before Naruto gave her a Yero-coated backhand through the head. Neliel knew already that he wasn't going to use his Zanpakuto. He seemed to throw her to the position where her Zanpakuto landed, so she was fortunate enough to be able to recover it. She grabbed and dislodged it from the sand, before she used Sonido to try and get a few quick slashes in on Naruto. Like with Neutra, his strong Yero tanked them all easily, and he didn't even bother trying to dodge it. Instead, he brought his head back and performed a headbutt, their masks meeting one another. She clutched her head and jumped back away from her opponent. She held her Zanpakuto horizontally at arm's length, as she rubbed the blade. It began to glow with a magenta Ryatsu. "Declare." She was cut off as Naruto appeared before her, grasping her blade in his right hand and wresting it from her grasp before she could release. It fell into the sand again, as Naruto charged up twin Zeros from his index fingers that he intended to fire at Neliel. "Damn it," she shouted, as she was completely outclassed. It was no surprise really, she was already completely outclassed by the Octava Espada. The Primera was in a league of his own. She used Sonido to get as far away from her commanding officer as possible, making sure to use it as much as possible to keep him on edge. He released one of his Zeros, the beam just missing her as she flashed away. The other one missed completely. Naruto watched forlornly as she disappeared into the night. He wasn't even going to bother chasing her and finishing her off. He liked killing games, not chasing games. He smirked in the direction that Neliel had run in, before he nonchalantly turned his back, and walked back into the palace. Neliel stood in the darkness of the Primera Espada's room, watching over the young-looking Eren as he slept. He looked remarkably peaceful while he slept, a stark contrast to what he was like when he was awake. She drew her Zanpakuto slowly, making sure she didn't make enough noise that would potentially wake Naruto. She winced as the sword gleamed in the dark, but she held it in front of her anyway. She growled as she remembered the abuses she went through during her time underneath Naruto's service. She never wanted that to happen to her ever again. She readied her sword in a downward stabbing position, prepared to stab her Zanpakuto right into his foul head. She grunted softly as she thrust forward, before the blade was halted in its track by a hand that shot out from underneath the covers and grabbed the blade in mid-attack. She gasped as she looked down and saw two red eyes looking directly at her, glaring at her intently. Hello, Neliel. Fancy meeting you here. Naruto said casually, with an undertone of hate in that voice of his. Neliel grimaced, and wedged the sword free from his grasp. She yelled out a war cry, before she rushed in with the intent to kill. The sword was knocked from her hands easily. Neliel, I once ran a kingdom where a good portion of the populace conspired to kill me. If you thought I didn't sleep with one eye open, then frankly you're an idiot, Naruto said calmly. You? Neliel said. I thought our little training session would have made it clear that I've disowned you as my fraction. I don't care if Aizen wants me to train you to become an Espada, my patience with you has run out, he shouted, turning on the light in his room. You're so pathetic that you aren't even worth killing. Become an Espada, and then we'll talk. Or fight, as I should say. Become the Segunda for God's sake, and then challenge me for the Primera spot. I'll enjoy crushing my former fraction then, because right now it's clear that you'll do nothing but run away from me. He stated as an afterthought, as Neliel was already in the doorway. I'll become stronger on my own, Naruto. It's clear that you are not going to help me grow stronger, you never have. All you've done is abuse me and try to kill me. These past 2 years have been miserable. I swear, I'll become stronger than Neutra, and stronger than you. I will take the Primera spot for myself and end your life. That, I promise. She said, her face stained with tears. The young Arrancar tripped over her own 2 feet, before she sped off down the hall before Naruto could chase her. Welcome to the Espada. Neliel, said Aizen politely, as the large number 3 was etched into her back while she was sitting at the Espada table. Overall, she looked proud of herself, having ascended to Tercera Espada all on her own, now being inferior to only Naruto and Baragan. The other Espada were looking a little downtrodden, as most of them had been moved down a rank with Neliel's recent addition into the Espada. Sail had been ejected from the group completely. For she did not enter through way of challenge, her skills had been recognized by Aizen himself, and she was awarded the rank based on that alone. Out of all the Espada though, none of them looked angrier than Naruto himself. Although he was the Primera, and Neliel was the Tercera and would still be little match for him, she would most likely become a thorn in his side sometime in the near future. It didn't help that she didn't fit in his ideal vision of what his Espada were going to look like. All of his former generals had been bumped down a rank, and Sail had been booted from the group completely. Ulquiorra, now the Quinta Espada, stole a glance at Naruto. Haribel, now the Quarta, did the same. Even they didn't look happy about this turn of events. Neutra and Grimmjow were fuming however, Neutra because of how much he despised Neliel, and Grimmjow because he was now the lowest ranked Espada. Naruto didn't pay much attention to the topic of the monthly Espada meeting, as he was too busy focusing on what kind of threat Neliel would become to him. The obvious solution would be to just get rid of her now, but that would leave too much of a mess and Aizen wouldn't be very happy about that. Maybe I can get Neutra to help me on this, and Sail too. I doubt he's very happy after he's been booted from the Espada. He'll obviously be looking for any way to reclaim his spot, he thought. The sooner they did something about Neliel the better. You are dismissed. Aizen droned on, and Naruto turned to look at him. He had been spacing out for so long that he didn't even hear Aizen dismiss them. Hopefully, he would be able to get to Neutra soon. A month later, and Naruto had walked the halls in a foul mood. A numeros bowed to him respectfully as he passed, and Naruto thanked him by bisecting him horizontally. Was that one of Baragan's fraction? Oh well, I doubt he'll miss that one much anyway. I know how much of a pain fraction can be, he said out loud. He had made progress on getting Sail to help with the Neliel case, but Neutra was being as stubborn as ever. He challenged Neliel to a fight just about every day now, and he always lost. Come to think of it, she doesn't bring her lame pals to those fights anymore. Maybe she's grown confident to go alone to this sort of deal anyway, he said, before he noticed 3 shadows wandering down the hallway in front of him. Well, speak of the Diablo. He whispered to himself, as he noticed just who it was. Neliel was walking down the hall at that moment, her kiss-ass lackeys following right behind her. Going somewhere? He asked as she passed by him, her fractions scurrying ahead of her to get some distance between them. Pesh and Dondochaka, he thought that was what their names were. Neliel huffed lightly. That is none of your business, she said, before she caught sight of the Arrancar corpse that she saw splattered all over the hall. Did you do that? She asked, almost a little angry at his actions. Naruto raised an eyebrow, before he huffed and nodded. Just killing anyone you feel like. You're a wild animal, not a... Yeah, save it. I know you like to get off by giving this speech, but I don't care if you think I'm a warrior, or a wild animal, or a whatever. All I care about is the fact that I know I could whoop your bitch ass so hard you wouldn't be able to sit down for a year, he taunted. Neliel turned around, and almost drew her sword. Oh? What's this, now? You wanna hang with the big dogs now, do ya? Don't you have smaller fish to go after or something? I mean, you go out of your way to fight one every damn day. And to think you claim to hate battling. He shook his head, his tone taking a mock scolding. What did you dash? She shouted, before a hand darted in front of her, blocking her path. Pesh! She said. Please, just ignore it. Nel-sama. He is doing nothing more than taunting you into a fight at the moment. It's not worth it to fight with the likes of him. Pesh reasoned. The three Arrancar turned their backs to Naruto, with Neliel throwing one last cold look his way. Naruto couldn't resist getting in one more taunt to her. Yeah, just run away, little Tercera. But always remember that big, bad Primera is gonna get ya, he cackled, bursting into peals of laughter as he saw Neliel wince subconsciously. Naruto knew better than to just go off on his own though. He knew exactly where she was going, and what was going to happen next. He didn't wait any longer, so in a quick flash, he was gone. He reappeared on a roof outside the main foyer of Las Noches, where the artificial sky gave light to anything underneath the dome. He honestly hated that little bit of renovation that Aizen did, but then again he hated everything that Aizen did. He had smothered his Ryatsu to make him undetectable, and hid in the rafters of the closest building he could find, where he was watching Neliel and Neutra down below. It looked like they were about to fight. Naruto watched on in silence as Neutra rushed Neliel, but she was just too fast to him to outmaneuver. Repeatedly, he kept getting thrown in the wall of building he was resting on. Okay, we're done here, Neliel said as she sheathed her sword. I'm glad we finished up in time for lunch. Those two will begin to worry if I'm out here too long. Naruto drowned out the following speech, which Neliel always made after she had defeated Neutra. He had heard it several times before, it was always about how they regained logical minds when they became Arrancar. And logical minds needed a reason to fight. And you lack that. I do not have a reason to fight you, and therefore I have no obligation to finish you off. What a crock of shit. Big words coming from a bitch who couldn't even stand up to Neutra a decade or two ago. Naruto thought from his perch. Neutra seemed to have had enough as well. I have a reason. I hate you. Neliel sighed. That's not a reason. That's instinct. You are an animal. I don't recognize you as a warrior, and that means you're not someone I have to fight. I don't feel like being burdened with taking the life of someone who's not even a warrior. She finished. And there it is. The same telegraphed speech every time. Don't you see, Neliel? We're all animals here, not warriors. Even you. If you were really as righteous and logical as you claim to be, you wouldn't even be holding this grudge against me. If you don't get rid of that retarded philosophy of yours and embrace your inner animal, you'll never be able to beat me, let alone challenge me. Naruto thought. Neliel had already walked away, and Naruto snapped himself out of his thoughts to witness the perfect opportunity to get rid of Neliel. If things went right, she would fall behind in strength, and simultaneously he would regain Neutra's loyalty. If things went wrong, he could still pin the blame on Neutra for Neliel's disappearance/death. It was perfect. Neutra was already conversing with his own Fraction, Tesla, when Naruto jumped from his perch and landed right beside him, his coattails flapping behind him. Tesla balked at the appearance of the strongest Espada, and backed away sweating. Neutra didn't look too happy to see him. "What you do want, Naruto?" he sneered. Despite the disrespect, Naruto smiled. "I have a proposition for you, Neutra." Later that day, Neliel just couldn't find her Fraction, Peshquatish and Dondochaka Burston. She had looked high and low for them all over her personal sector, but they were just nowhere to be found. And it was right in time for dinner as well. "Pesh! Dondochaka!" she called, as she stepped out in the main sands of Las Noches, where Neutra was brandishing his scythe as her menacingly. "Looking for something?" he asked. "That's none of your business," Neliel responded, before she passed Neutra. "Carrying your weapon around like that is just a threat. If you want to appear strong, keep it hidden while you're walking around," she lectured to Neutra, who only smiled deviously. Just as Neliel had walked past Neutra, there was a massive explosion, and the wall right beside them crumbled to pieces. From the opening of the wall spilled two particular Arankar. Though, it was generous if you could even call them Arankar anymore. "Pesh! Dondochaka!" Neliel gasped out in horror at what she saw before her. Besides their grievous injuries, there was something else very striking about the two Fraction. "I'm very sorry, Nel-sama," Pesh managed to gasp out, though what he was apologizing for, Neliel didn't know. She looked up to Neutra in horror, her temper getting much more ignited at the sight of him. "You completely tore off their masks, didn't you?" she asked, almost ready to throw up at the unspeakable act amongst hollows. It was the worst crime imaginable. "How could you?" she screamed. "So what? Those two were weak," Neutra said casually, before he swung his scythe Sunpokdo at her. Neliel drew her sword in response to that, blocking the attack. "How about it? I gave you a reason to fight me," Neutra roared. "No," Neliel began, as the two combatants broke off from each other. "This isn't a reason to fight, but you've hurt people that were very dear to me," she whispered. "And you're going to pay for it," she said, as she rushed Neutra, her sword at the ready. She forced the Octava into the back wall, before she kicked him forcefully, breaking the wall and sending him to the sands below. Once down there, Neutra blocked a few more strikes from her, before he jumped over her and purposely let himself open. "Too slow," Neliel shouted as she slashed at him. The second she hit skin though, Neutra vanished into thin air. Neliel's eyes widened in surprise, and she looked around frantically for her opponent, but before she could, her mask and scalp were cracked open. Neutra stood over the injured Neliel, before he scoffed and grabbed the unconscious Arankar by the scruff of her neck. A few minutes later, and he was standing on the balcony of Las Noches, the perpetual night of the desert watching over him. He leaned in over the edge, three bodies being dragged along beside him. "What do you want?" "Your job's done, Sail Aporo," he said, as the pink-haired Arankar made himself visible from the shadows. Sail smiled lightly. "Don't say that, we're comrades who work together to further the same ambitions, and we've known each other a long time, what with Naruto and all. At least let me observe the subject until the experiment ends. I don't remember sharing any of your ambitions, loser. Besides, everyone knows you're only doing this so you can get your old position in the Espada back. You, who were booted from the Espada for being too weak." It was coincidence that our interests overlapped for a moment. Neutra explained. "We worked together so that you could fight against Neliel and I could conduct research on a new device, and then of course there was that incident with, he was cut off. Are you two quite finished? All three of us know the real reason why we're getting rid of Neliel," came Naruto's voice, as he too emerged from the shadows. "I set this up for both of you, Neutra, Sail Aporo. I made it so you could fight Neliel and you could reclaim your position in the Espada," he said to Neutra and Sail respectively. I never did figure out why you wanted her gone so badly, Naruto. Sale admitted. Idiot. It's because she doesn't fit into the ideal espada. He began. Neutra and Sale Aporo looked at him quizzically, like they didn't know what to expect. Anyone could figure out that she's Aizen's golden child right now. He wants her to replace me as the next Primera. But, even her position of the Tercera is not beneficial to any of us. She wasn't around when me and Barragan ruled Hueco she's completely loyal to Aizen, and that's a problem. I need the Espada stocked with members who won't be loyal to Aizen, and Neliel definitely doesn't fit the bill here. Ha! Sounds to me like you're just afraid of her. Added Neutra. You would think that, wouldn't you, Neutra? After you needed Sale Aporo's device to get the jump on her, you're a giant fucking hypocrite. I gave you the means to fight Neliel, I expect you to kill her once she recovers from that wound, Naruto said. Yeah, I got it. Neutra said, before he dropped the 3 unconscious Arrancar into the chasm. They hit the sand with a remarkable thud. Neliel, what separates us is experience, not strength. I will surpass you before you recover from that wound and return to Las Noches. I'll become so great that your sword will never be able to reach me. If Neutra kills her instead of me, he'll take the fall from Aizen. Not to mention, if I make it look like I'm targeting Arrancar with an intense loyalty to Aizen, one who has no history with me, then that makes me look suspicious. Not to mention. Hey, Neutra. I hope you remember the details of our deal. I set it up so you could fight Neliel, and you know what I get out of it, right? I hope you're not thinking of double-crossing me. He whispered the last part lowly, as some of his Ryatsu began to leak out. Yeah, I got it already. I'll be loyal to you, again. Don't worry about it. Neutra said, with a hand wave. Directly after that happened, an explosion of pink Ryatsu occurred down below, where Neliel and her fraction were deposited. After the dust and Ryatsu faded, Neliel looked a little different. Overall, she was reminiscent of a 3-year-old child. She turned into a kid? Neutra said in wonder. Sale Aporo adjusted his glasses, looking down at the new Arrancar intently. Fascinating. I've never seen this phenomenon before. Perhaps her Ryatsu flowed out from her broken mask, making her spiritual form shrink in size, or... who cares how it happened? Neutra cackled, as he stared down at the child. You're pathetic, Neliel. That body suits you perfectly, he said, before the happiness faded from his tone. It looks like our blades will never clash again. That's the only bad thing about this, Neliel. Neutra took his leave at that moment, Sale Aporo following directly behind him. Naruto watched them go for a little while longer, before he turned to watch the 3 Arrancar down there for a little longer. He sat on one of the pillars of Las Noches, contemplating how his plan worked out. It looks like I won't have to have Neutra kill you after all. With that new body down there, you're as good as dead. You'll be in no shape to reclaim your position as the Tercera, Neliel, and even if you did, I will have already transcended your complete potential. He noted, before he hopped off the pillar and returned to the main foyer of Las Noches. Down at the base of Las Noches, the child that was once Neliel 2 Odelschwank fluttered open her eyes, her memory shredded and forgotten of the recent trauma. Where am I? She squeaked in a childish, toddler voice, as she looked around and spotted the 2 other Arrancar she had fallen down with. Who are you two? She asked. Did she lose her memories? Pesh wondered, as Dondochaka gasped right beside him. The little girl muttered, my head hurts, and Dondochaka couldn't handle it anymore. Pesh! He exclaimed, reaching out a hand like he wanted to touch the child. Don't panic, Dondochaka. Pesh whispered. There's only one path that we can take now. Nel-sama. Neliel 2 Odelschwank-sama is dead. With her mask broken, her powers robbed, and her memories lost, she is dead. The person in front of us is no longer Nel-sama. Therefore, we must protect her, he continued. Dondochaka looked at him in wonder. Nelsama hated fighting, so in a way, we're going to give her the life she always wished her. We'll protect her from pain, from hardship, and all other types of suffering. We'll protect her now that she's weak, even if it costs us our lives. Protect her. He trailed off, before his voice gained another air of confidence. Protect her from Neutra Gilga. And Sail Aporo Grands. And, he trailed off again, as tears began pouring from his maskless eyes. Dondo Chaka looked at him in concern, as Pesh grit his teeth. And Naruto Uzumaki. The archives of Las Noches were a new feature implemented after Barragan's kingdom had fallen, located immediately to the right of Sail's chambers, where the research wing was located. It was a large room, about as long and wide as the main throne room, stacked with many shelves worth of information that had been gathered from both Soul Society and Huecomundo. Most importantly, it contained Aizen's records on individual Shinigami, their strengths and weaknesses, and their combat abilities. The only Shinigami missing from the archives were the profiles of the commanders themselves. A large monitor, product of Sail, hung in the back of the room. Armed with technology from the 12th Division's Research and Development Institute, he had easily managed to get a feed into Soul Society itself. It would have been nice if they could keep tabs a little bit earlier, but Sail had just made his breakthrough a few years back, so they were out of luck. Naruto sat in the large chair in front of the monitor, the file on Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni spilled out in front of him. Out of all the Shinigami in Aizen's records, the So Taishu had by far the biggest profile. It was amazing how far Aizen went into detail on the guy, and Naruto mused it was most likely as a result of using his Kyuka Suigetsu. So that's what he has planned for the So Taishu. Using an Aaron car to achieve the purpose, well, I can't say I wouldn't do the same in his position. I'll have to look into this, but he'll probably create this Wonderweiss soon. He folded his hands in front of him, putting Yamamoto's profile to the side. He pressed a button on the side of the monitor, watching as the screen lit up. He typed in a few codes, and the static turned into a much more vivid view of what was happening within Soul Society. So, after all these decades of waiting, Aizen finally decided to reveal himself. Soul Society will be on our case sooner or later, he remarked, focusing in on Tsukioku Hill. Aizen had just trashed these two Shinigami kids, an orange-haired one and a red-haired one. After that had happened, another one of the captains showed up and attacked Aizen, but he was defeated almost as easily with a Kido spell. It looked like even the captains weren't as strong as he thought they would be. Aizen was an exception. He heard a little bit of rumbling in the distance, and noticed that the Gillian were getting ready. On the screen, it looked like Aizen and his cohorts had gotten captured by the Shinigami. It would be nice if they just offed him right now, but then I wouldn't benefit from that at all, Naruto remarked, as Aizen grinned on screen. A column of light fell from the sky and engulfed all three rogue captains, and a tear opened in the sky, showing all the Gillian that resided within. Negation. Of course, that's how they would get away, he commented, as the three captains disappeared into Huecomundo with a flashy exit. They would be back here before long, all three of them. Usually there was just one of them here at any given time. This made it a little more difficult to move. The war's this winter. We're gonna have to make our move soon, when he's ready to attack Soul Society. He should have the Hugyoku by now. It will be a useful tool, especially if the Libro de Ciclos is accurate in its abilities. The Hugyoku is supposedly a more advanced form of the Bolus de Evolution. It should be able to power an already evolved Aaronkar up. Even despite that, the abilities of our Aaronkar are already far beyond Soul Society's expectations. Aizen is probably going to reveal them to the world this fall. I'm going to have to take care so that Soul Society gets as little information as possible on the army. Naruto gathered up the papers on Yamamoto, and thought back to that valuable book that he had found in the bowels of his kingdom. It was one trump card that he had over Aizen, because the Lord of Las Noches didn't know about it. Which meant he had no idea about the secrets that it contained. When it came to that knowledge, Aizen's plan to obtain the Ukin almost seemed a little laughable. He placed the file back on the shelf, before he swung the door open and entered the hall. Aizen would definitely want a meeting after this. Kurosaki Ichigo had never felt so unlucky in his entire life. While it was true he had managed to save Rukia and defeat her brother, Kachiki Byakuya, things immediately went south from there. Ichigo had learned that he had been used the entire time by a captain in the Godai 13, so he could retrieve something that he called the Hogyoku, which happened to be located within Rukia's body. He had extracted the damn thing as soon as he had showed up, but it looked like he was going to be defeated when Yoruchi and another captain whom he didn't know put a sword to his neck. Aizen managed to turn the tables yet again though, when the Menos Grande opened a rift in Soul Society and drew him in with their negation, pretty much making the former captain untouchable. He had saved Rukia's life, but in the process had gained an enemy that could threaten everything that he held dear. An enemy with a whack-job plan to merge the boundaries between Shinigami and Hollow, and ascend to a greater plane of existence. While Ichigo and his friends rested in the 4th Division's barracks a few days after the battle, Soul Society was now in much deeper turmoil. They had lost 3 captains in an instant, an event unheard of since the Visored defection 100 years prior. The Godai 13 was in need of promotions, and it was in need of promotions fast. But, with the Central 46 dead at the hands of Aizen, there was a massive void in the power that made decisions around Siriitii difficult. Shit, what happens now? Ichigo asked himself, as he lay awake in his personal bed in the infirmary. Soul Society would probably send them back in a few days after everyone had recovered, but then there was the matter of Aizen. Things probably weren't going to work out so easily in his favor. "Yo, I see you're up early today," came a cool voice from outside the window. Ichigo grunted, the voice bringing him out of his thoughts. The orange-haired teenager turned towards the window, where Kakashi was standing on the windowsill. "Kakashi," Ichigo said in acknowledgement. The silver-haired shinobi turned Shinigami had been one of the first opponents Ichigo had to face within Soul Society. The Ryoka boy had fought the 3rd seed of the 5th Division directly after his fight with Ikaku. Kakashi's proficient usage of Kido had kept Ichigo at a disadvantage the entire fight, but he managed to come out on top after he had gathered up enough willpower to eliminate fear from his strikes. The silver-haired Shinigami opened up his robes, showing a multitude of bandages across his chest and abdomen. "You really did a number on us back there. I don't think I've ever seen a single Shinigami defeat so many strong opponents in such a short period of time. The Sotaishu will definitely want to keep tabs on your growth now, especially with the whole fiasco with Aizen. I think you'll become a valuable ally in the long run," he explained. With 3 captains gone rogue, Siriitii is in a weaker condition than it has ever been before. Aizen must take a full year in awakening the Hogyoku before he can use it, which means we have only a year to prepare for his attack. We have time, but it's not much. What we need to focus on now is filling the positions missing after Aizen's defection, and continue to harness the abilities of our allies. So, what do you want me to do about it? I'm not supposed to tell you this, but it looks like you'll be getting in contact with us sooner rather than later. Although, whether Aizen's goons get to you sooner is another matter. Kakashi leapt into the room, tired of standing on the windowsill. The captains are holding a meeting right now as we speak. I believe the subject matter has something to do with the promotion of several Shinigami to captains, but you'll inevitably be brought up in their conversation, he said. Ichigo looked at him funnily, like he didn't understand why. Meanwhile, the meeting between the 10 remaining captains of Soul Society had just gone underway. Yamamoto banged his staff against the ground, calling to attention the group. He looked less than happy. With the defection of 5th Division Captain Aizen Susuke, as well as 3rd Division Captain Ikamaru Jin and 9th Division Captain Tosen Kaname, the Godai 13 is in a critical state. With the Hogyoku at his disposal, Aizen Susuke has become the greatest threat to both Soul Society and the human world. We must take immediate action if we are to purge this menace. The Captain Commander gave pause. The first order in business is the replacement of the 3 captains that have betrayed Soul Society. With the Central 46 effectively out of commission, I will be the one to oversee the promotion process alongside 2 other captains. He opened his eyes, and looked at them all intently. If any one of you has any recommendations, please let me know immediately," he said, as the captains contemplated the decision amongst themselves. A few of them already knew who they were going to pick. Several months later, Minato walked around the Siriiti in a slump, his duties for the day already finished. Being both the vice captain and the acting captain meant double the workload, and he couldn't ask anyone else to take it off his hands. The rest of the squad was understandably bummed out ever since Captain Aizen's defection, most notably 4th seat Hinamori. "Good evening," Namikaze Fukutechu greeted 2 female Shinigami in his division who were lounging in the street. They were carrying a couple brooms, but it was obvious that they were slacking off. "Yeah," he said, too tired to even scold them. He seemed to do that a lot these days, with his increased workload and the fact that his kids had recently left the house. It couldn't be helped, they were physically 21 years old now, and they had been accepted into that division. Their parents couldn't have been more proud. After a few more minutes of walking, he turned a corner which led to the 5th Division's barracks. He opened the sliding door gently, careful not to disturb anyone who was already asleep. A few Shinigami were running around doing chores, and they didn't even bother to stop and greet him. Not that it mattered, of course. His office was at the end of the hallway, which he had renovated ever since the captain had left. He sort of liked his old one better, but he couldn't really complain. In his hands he held a stack of paperwork, the product of a full day's work when it came to be a vice captain. He clutched the doorknob and turned it lightly, and before he entered the room he was well aware of the presence. However, it wasn't the vastly powerful Hollow or a captain as one might expect to be present in a room such as this. Rather, it was a random, faceless Shinigami that was in the room. He wasn't even a seated officer, and overall his features just seemed kind of forgettable. He was here to deliver a message to Minato, though. The nameless, faceless Shinigami bowed to the 5th Division's vice captain, getting onto one knee and producing a message. "Congratulations, Namikaze Fukutechu. The test results for the captain's trial have come in, and you have been accepted as the new captain of the 5th Division. All you must do now is attend the initiation ceremony in order to make it official," he said. Minato's face split into a wide grin, and the vice captain turned captain enthusiastically walked forward and clapped his hands against the messenger's shoulders. The messenger looked a little bothered and disgruntled from the sudden contact, but he didn't say anything. "Thank you. I've been waiting to hear the news on that for weeks now. I mean it, thank you. This is wonderful news, being a captain will undoubtedly be an amazing experience," he said, his voice a little flustered. The other Shinigami nodded frantically, his eyes wide with bewilderment as Minato's joy washed over him. The blonde Shinigami removed his hands, and threw his paperwork to the side carefully. He then rushed out of the open door, presumably to tell the world the news. He rushed down the street in a spasm, eager to find his wife. As he rushed through the 3rd Division's barracks, several Shinigami called out to him to stop. Yet he only waved brightly at them and continued to run. "Kushina," he shouted as he barged into her office. The red-haired woman turned to him and smirked, and Minato's eyes widened in surprise as he noticed the Haori clutched in her hands. Naruto clutched a memo as he walked through the halls of Las Noches. He punched the head off of a random errand car without even looking up from the paper. The shock on the figure's face didn't disappear, even in death. "So, Barragan's been demoted to Tercera, has he? Who in the hell is this Stark kid, and how do I know if he has what it takes to be the Segunda?" he asked himself, crunching the paper in his hand. "So, Yami has taken the spot of the Decima, I guess? I've heard his first mission was to be sent to the human world to check up on some Shinigami kid," he pondered, as his eyes narrowed when he read something on the paper. Apparently they had been sent to some place called Karakura Town, which apparently was some kind of special spiritually aware city in the human world. The hell? Ciro Espada? Him? You've gotta be fucking kidding me. Maybe Aizen just gave him the spot to satisfy his ego. He's not the type of Arrancar who would accept anything less than the strongest position. Although, Ciro Espada is rather fitting for an Arrancar like him. It means he's nothing after all. I'll make sure to dissolve that ridiculous rank when I regain control. Speaking of that mission of his, Ulquiorra and Yami were due back to Las Noches right now. That was the purpose of him being called over to the General Arrancar meeting hall. It could be an important finding. He opened the door to the meeting hall. It was dark inside as usual. Despite all that, it didn't mean that the room was completely vacant or anything. In fact, he could already sense no less than 20 other presences in there, from both Espada and non-Espada Arrancar. Welcome. Naruto, Aizen's voice rang out from the back of the room. Even though he should have gotten used to it by now, it still had an infuriating tone to it. Naruto grunted in response, the surly Arrancar going to the opposite end of the room from Aizen and sitting down next to one of Grimmjow's Frachen and Grimmjow himself. Now the only Arrancar yet to arrive were Ulquiorra and Yami themselves. Never mind, here they were now. The door had closed as soon as it had opened, and the two Arrancar took the spotlight in the center of the room, away from all the other Arrancar on the side. Welcome back. Ulquiorra. Yami. Please, tell us your findings here, in front of your 20 brothers and sisters. Aizen said smoothly. Yes, Aizen-sama. Ulquiorra said. Naruto repressed the urge to whistle, and then scratched his blood-red whisker marks. Ulquiorra had really gotten that whole loyal minion voice down. It was pretty convincing. No one even flinched as Ulquiorra plucked out his left eye from its socket, holding it at arm's length and crushing it as if it were glass. A nifty little trick he had picked up from his masked days. Naruto looked around. The other Arrancar were really soaking in the information. The fox Arrancar rubbed his pointed mask fox ears, before he too closed his eyes. There were a few humans that had tried their luck against Yami after he had used Gonzui, but they were cleaned up so easily it wasn't even funny. Honestly, Yami smacked him once, and it broke the kid's weird arm in two. Then the orange-haired girl attempted to use some fly thing on Yami, which was crushed without a second thought. She fell to pieces after that. But after this, the orange-haired kid showed up. The same one he had seen when he was viewing Soul Society, where he along with the red-haired one had gotten destroyed by Aizen himself. He watched as the orange-haired kid he had seen before clashed swords with the two Espada. He seemed to be beating Yami at first, before something happened to him and he lost it completely. Yami took advantage of this and kicked the kid's ass. After that, opponents Naruto wasn't expecting showed up out of the woodwork. Urahara Kajur and Shihoin Yoruchi, to be exact. Yoruchi then took Yami to town, completely overwhelming him while Urahara also joined in the fray a little. Ulquiorra retreated into Huecomundo after that, effectively saving Yami any further humiliation. I see. So the reason you chose not to kill him was because you felt he was worthless? Aizen guessed. Ulquiorra nodded, his left eye growing back in its place. Yes. It is impossible that this child would not stand in the way of our goals, and it would be a waste of time to bother ourselves further with him. In addition to that, Ulquiorra was cut off. Don't give me that shit. Naruto looked over to the right, where Grimmjow was sitting a few seats away. It figured that he would be the one to speak up in this kind of situation. If I ran into such a weak shit like that, I would have killed him in one attack. No matter how much a piece of garbage he was, the word kill appeared in your orders, didn't it? That means you should have killed him without hesitation. I agree. This applies to any enemy. Even if there is no value in killing them, there certainly is no value in letting them live as well. Piped up Shalong. More importantly, Yami. You got your ass kicked, didn't you? He wasn't worth killing my ass. More like I failed to kill him. He commented. Grimmjow, you bastard. The one that beat me up was the black woman and the sandal guy. He mumbled. Grimmjow scoffed at him, continuing to talk trash at the Decima. And I'm saying I would have taken them all out with a single attack, he retorted. Ulquiorra was the one who spoke up next. Grimmjow, Do you understand what I'm saying when that boy is of no consequence to us? The orders Aizen-sama gave had nothing to do with his current ability. Rather, it is his growth rate that is truly frightening. There is also a possibility that we could bring him over to our side if the imbalance in his power continues. That is why we did not kill him. And what happens if we can't bring him over to our side, huh? What are you going to do then? Grimmjow asked forcefully. Then I will personally deal with him myself. Ulquiorra finished. Grimmjow looked a little taken aback, before he grumbled to himself and sat down. Naruto couldn't help but agree with Grimmjow. Ulquiorra was obviously just trying to remain within Aizen's graces for the time being, but the fact of the matter was that Naruto didn't feel the need to have this Shinigami on his side. Any Shinigami or anything affiliated with the Shinigami was not welcome in his forces, and this kid could become a thorn in his side later. Aizen droned on a little longer about trusting Ulquiorra's judgment, something Naruto didn't really pay attention to in the slightest. In fact, he barely even registered that he had been dismissed. He caught a shock of blue hair disappear out the doorway, before he grinned maniacally, and used Sonido to catch up to the retreating errand car. Grimmjow, stop right there. I know what you plan on doing, he said. Naruto, he questioned, before the blue-haired errand car scoffed. Don't try to stop me. I'm going to the human world right away to take out that little shit, as well as anyone else that might get in our way. He turned to walk away. Naruto put a hand on his shoulder and grinned. I know. I'm joining you. Later that evening, Grimmjow assembled in the human world with all 5 of his fraction. The Gargantas closed soundly as they stepped out into the darkness, eager to get into a fight. Shalong, Edrad, Nakim, Yilfort, and D. Roy. Most of them were competent Arankars in their own right, and they were some of the oldest Arankar living in Las Noches, barring the Privaron and some of the current Espada. They had been with Grimmjow with a long time, even before they had joined the Reno animal. Were you followed? He asked. Of course not. Although, when I came here, I couldn't help but notice some very powerful Ryatsu. Ulquiorra failed to include them in his report, so they're entirely new threats. Shalong explained. Use your pesquisa. Naruto should be here any sec now, he said, before his 5 fraction blanched at the thought of the Primera coming to aid them. Those Shinigami wouldn't know what hit them. The fraction and the Espada opened up their pesquisa, sensing the entire town for powerful Ryatsu. Many signatures showed up in their radar, far more than what Ulquiorra had described. There are way more. They might have called into Soul Society and gotten some backup as well. We've got our work cut out for us. Killing them would have been the best course of action, Grimmjow said, scratching the back of his head. All of you. Let's go, don't bother distinguishing one Ryatsu from another, and most importantly, don't hold back, he said. As soon as he finished that sentence, another Garganta opened in the skies above Karakura town. From the depths of the void, out stopped the blonde Primera himself. His mood and expression were similar to Grimmjow's current one, meaning that anything could basically set off his temper at this point. It had been quite some time since he had set foot in the human world, and it just never seemed as comfortable as Huecomundo did. He glared in front of him, and Grimmjow's fraction took the hint immediately. He did not want them anywhere near him for the time being. When he had shushed the fraction to a comfortable distance away, he walked up to Grimmjow in midair, the Ryatsu levitation keeping him afloat. The other Espada acknowledged his presence with a quick nod. Have you found them? He asked Grimmjow. The Primera Espada clenched his fists, before he rubbed his knuckles against his red whisker marks that he had for an estigma. Of course. There are several more than what Ulquiorra included in his report. We were just about to go kill them all. It doesn't matter if they have even the slightest amount of Ryatsu, we're gonna kill them. Naruto found himself agreeing with Grimmjow. He didn't know how many Ryatsus down there were from strong Shinigami, or from just spiritually aware humans. He supposed it didn't really matter though. They were all going to die. It won't do at all if the humans somehow find a way to fight against me. Though, It looks like a few of them have already found ways to fight against both us and the Shinigami. That orange boy will likely be coming, and he will likely want to fight the strongest opponent here. I assume that you can handle him easily, and I don't need to step in. Naruto asked. Grimmjow scoffed. Of course, that weak Shinigami will be no match for me even unreleased. I'll mop him up real quick and get back to business. You don't have to even move a muscle in this fight. Is that so? Well, I'll make sure to watch your men closely, because I'm gonna need as many strong Arrancar as possible prepared for this winter. I assume you're game? Naruto asked. Obviously. You know as well as everyone else does that I despise serving Aizen. The question is, when do we make our move? He asked, the taller Arrancar staring down suspiciously at Naruto. Aizen has just started gaining control of the Hogyoku, and will want to wait until it is completely awakened before we make our move. Aizen claims he can make it work before the Winter War, so I assume that is when we'll strike. Until now, keep the operation under wraps. Don't even tell your own fraction. Naruto whispered. Grimmjow gave a feline grin, his wild face and turquoise markings giving him the perfect visage of a jungle cat. He laughed wildly, the teeth of his Arrancar mask moving along with him. But before that, we need to focus on the task at hand. He muttered, before he turned to look at his loyal fraction who had given him the moniker of king so long ago. Alright, guys. You ready to go get M? He asked rhetorically, as Grimmjow's 5 fraction all took on predatory grins such as the one on their master's face. There are a lot of Shinigami down there, so let's go. I don't want you to let even one of them get away, he shouted, as the fraction rushed into battle. Down in the main part of Karakura town, many Shinigami had their senses go haywire as they sensed the strong Ryatsu coming from the skies. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed this what if and want to see next part of it, comment down below and let me know. Also share this video with your friends. See you in the next video. Peace.